الله الكبير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. الله الكبير. Again, we are grateful to God for giving us this opportunity, and we're healthy, alhamdulillah, and everything has gone good for us, so we have to be grateful to the source of all of these blessings that we have. It's not by accident. This is by divine design and providence, and so we should keep this in mind, that the reason that we are here, this is again is a huge blessing from God, and so we still have the will and the love for God to do this, and be a good servant of Him, and He's the one who provides everything for us, and so we have to remember that, and we have to keep that in mind, that no one else can provide these things for us except God alone. So anyway, gratefulness is a godlike quality, as I always say, and so we should follow His path, which is the only path. There are no other paths that we can follow. Any other route that we take is going to take us to oblivion. So the path of God is the only path that's going to take us to Him, a straight path. There is no crookedness in this path, and it's very clear and concise that God is telling us to follow this straight path. So anyway, so this is again a godlike quality, and so we should return this favor in kind, and make sure that we are grateful to the source of all of the blessings that we have. Today, what I wanted to discuss and basically elaborate on the chapter 16, and we went through that chapter, and that chapter is a chapter that God is talking about the honeybee, and the honeybee is a creature that God has created, and his task is to make honey, and so what is the mechanism for this? This is what we have to understand, and God is saying that He inspires the honeybee to do this. Okay, I stress on this fact that we go back to this idea of chapter 41. Chapter 41, God is saying that once He created the 7 layers of vacua and matter, then for every vacua He actually inspired its laws, or its affairs, if you like. So these things, this inspiration is actually telling us of a collective consciousness that exists. So this inspiration actually extends to human beings. And again, we read in chapter 16, verse 123, that God is telling us about, well, if I go back to 120, verse 120 of that chapter, God is telling us that the creed of Abraham, about the creed of Abraham. And then He said, God is telling us, He says, then, in 123, He says, then we inspired you to follow the nation of Abraham, and the monotheist, and he was never an idol worshiper. So this idea of that, arguments and things start, that where can we find this in the Quran, or when those are all answered in the Quran. These are answers to these questions. Okay, in chapter 21, verse 73, God is telling us, He says that the children of Abraham, they were inspired how to do the contact prayers, how to give their cleansing charity, Okay? So you can tell people to give their cleansing charity, and they may say yes or something, but they do it reluctantly. There's a big difference between that person and that person who's been inspired by God to do this, because the one who's inspired by God is given it willingly. He's given it with joy. It's not a burden upon him or her to give the cleansing charity. Okay? The one who is being told to do that, that person is the person who is going to do that reluctantly. He doesn't want to do it, or she doesn't want to do it. She just does it to alleviate a burden upon himself or herself. And God knows that. Okay? So the system of this giving, or how much should we give? Questions come up like this. How much should we give? What can we find in the Quran that tells us how much we should give? These questions come up. Again, you're inspired how to do it. And you do it the correct way. Just like the honeybee did, or does. The honeybee is inspired to do exactly how to make honey. What to do, what to make home, and what to eat, from what to eat, and then produce that honey. So that is an inspiration from God. It's not coming from anybody else. The honeybee doesn't go to school to learn those things. The honeybee is not taught by somebody how to do that. The other honeybees are not teaching that honeybee how to do it. They are inspired individually how to do it by God. Okay? So the same way, children of Abraham were inspired how to do that, how to do their contact prayers, how to do good deeds. Okay? Doing good deeds is the same thing. You're inspired how to do good deeds. You can't do good deeds on your own. You have to be inspired by God how to do it. Again, if you are told how to do it because you are forced to do it, it's not going to count. The problem with that is that you will do it reluctantly, and God knows that. You're not going to get rewarded for something that you're doing reluctantly, okay, because somebody is telling you or forcing you to do it. So that inspiration that comes from God is exactly that thing in verse 73 from chapter 21, the prophets. Okay? That's how it happened. Moses' mother was inspired to put the baby in a basket and threw it into the river. Okay? And, to some extent, that sounds crazy. If you tell somebody to do it this way, that sounds crazy. But that's exactly designed to save Moses. And she was inspired that what's going to happen to this baby. Exactly. And that's exactly happened to Moses. Moses was picked up by Pharaoh. Okay. And he grew up in the house of Pharaoh. And it became a source of sorrow for Pharaoh. Because Pharaoh was not a good person. He was not a man of God. He was somebody who thought that he was God. Or claimed to be. So that's the difference between somebody who's forced to do things and somebody who's been inspired to do it. So this is why I always say this, okay, that when we read the Quran, we learn things that was completely unknown to us. We had no idea. We had no idea about the collective consciousness. Some people did. Those people who were men of God, and they knew.
Control unavailable. Control available.
Okay, those people who knew God, okay, they already know that. They know about the collective consciousness of this universe. Okay. And the ones that don't know that, they come up with the wrong theory that doesn't make any sense. They cannot predict things. They cannot learn things. They are not known to people. Okay. They come and go. And, there are multitudes of those guys. But people who are people of God, they recognize that. They recognize that not all of this stuff is created in vain. These are the things that God has created, and He is in full contact with His creation. So when we look at the rock, we look at this earth, we look at the moon, okay? God says, you should look again. In chapter 67, He says, look again, do you see any flaws? And the reason that there are no flaws in there, because they exactly obeyed the laws that God had inspired in them. That's how they did it. They had no other way. There's no other way. So for our own good, that's what we have to do too. We are the only ones who was questioning these things. Okay? Let our hearts open to the inspiration from God. And then He pours it in there. He tells you how to behave, how to do things. Okay? Not to take God's worship as a burden upon you. Okay? So Ramadan is almost over. We got one more day to go, aside from today. And, and if you miss something, if you miss for one reason or another, you can just continue doing that until you finish. But the point is that we should not see this as a burden upon us. God says this is the best for you if you only knew. So should we take His word or take somebody else's word? That's what we have to do. Okay? Some people think, well, you're starving yourself or this or the others, but that's not the case. You go through this exercise because God is telling us to do this. Because He decreed this upon us. And this is for our own good. So as I said, we should not see these as a burden. We should see it as a blessing from God. As a gift from Him. That He gives us this gift for our own good. And we should accept the gift graciously. Okay? So we get to the point that we're actually enjoying worshiping God. Because again, as I said, okay, we read this in the Quran again, that tells us about what is happening in heaven. In heaven, this is a constant glorification of God. There is no stopping. And the way that God is describing it, that is really the enjoyment there. The enjoyment is constant glorification and praising God for eternity. And eternity doesn't mean that there is no end to the time or something. You are in charge of time. God will put you in charge of time. God will put you in charge of all of these different dimensions that He has created. You'll be in charge. Okay? He tells you that the extent of the paradise is as big as the seven skies put together. Okay? And the matter within it. That's the extent of it. That's how big that is. And then He says that they will be neighbors in this huge place. Okay? You will be neighbors. That righteous people will be neighbors. So how is that possible? Okay. Again, we go back to the same thing, that this kind of realm that God is talking about is completely beyond our imagination. Okay. And He only brings examples for us, that we may have reference points, that we would not get lost in this description that God is telling us about. Okay. A person who is used to this four-dimensional Minkowski space that we live in, okay, all of a sudden you're describing something that you see, look, I'm going to put you in charge of all of these things. And that's the enjoyment that comes with it. And that's praise and then glorification of God is the enjoyment that comes with it. And that is an eternal way of doing things. Okay. So again, as I said, one more day left, and we make sure that we are on best behavior. Okay. And again, do not see this as a burden upon us. See it as a blessing from God, as a gift from God, as something that He has bestowed upon us that we cannot even imagine how beautiful this is. So we just have to put our trust in Him. Okay? As I said, a lot of people don't know that phrase, "In God we trust," which is the motto of this nation. Okay, actually that's a verbatim phrase from the Quran. It's not in the Bible, it's in the Quran. And amazing that the motto of this nation is actually "In God we trust." Okay. And so we have to put our trust in Him and just believe Him, what He tells us and when He tells us. Okay. So I'm going to stop here and we'll finish this.